Okay, hi guys, welcome back. Last time we left Europe in the bad place. Around the year 1000, Europe was poor, broke up into small pieces, and sitting on the edge of somebody else's trade network. Asia was far ahead, and I ended by asking, so what happened? Today we started to answer that. This unit covers 1000 to 1300 and is called the Commercial Revolution. Over the past 300 years, Europe grows and the population goes up, income per person goes up, cities grow fast, and the trade grows many times over. Now, I want to be careful with the word revolution. Nothing here happens overnight. 300 years is a long time, but when you look back at it, something clearly changed. Here's the plan for today. First, we look at lives on the ground, the feudal system, farming, and the village. Then we look at the trade, and this is where the economists gets interesting. We'll spend real time on one question. How do two strangers trade with each other when there's no police and no real court? That question is the heart of this lecture, and we'll use a little game theory to answer it. Then we'll look at the money and finance, credit, fears, and government debt. And we'll finish with cities and guilds. So let's start. At the start of the period, Europe was rediscovering its political strength. Its borders were expanding. Two examples on the slide. Here, from the 11th century onward, various Christian kings of the Leon, Castile, Aragon took back more of the Iberia from the Muslim rulers of Al-Andalus. That's the Reconquista in Spain and Portugal, and it goes on 4 centuries. Now, here's the part I want you to notice because it's economics, not war. This was good news for early settlers. In the 1000 and the 150s and 1160s, the Archbishop of Toledo was offering land in return for rent of just 1/10 of the grain harvest, or 1/6 of the grapes, a much lower burden than established areas. Think about what's going on here. You just taken a few land, it's empty and it's dangerous because it's near a border where fighting happens. So how do you get people to move there and farm it? You offer them a better deal, lower rent, that's a price. If the risk is higher, the price has to be lower and nobody comes. And that has a knock-on effect that matters a lot. If peanuts has somewhere else to go, laws in these old areas cannot squeeze them as hard. When people can live, the bargaining power goes up. Keep that in mind. It comes back when we talk about towns. And much more ambitiously. The first crusade led to the Christian kingdoms in the Middle East, some lasting nearly 2 centuries, and then the economic result. This occupation seems to have sparked Europe's demand for new goods, particularly sugar. I like this line because this is small point with big lesson. Europeans go to the Middle East to fight a war. While they are there, they eat sugar. They come home and they want more sugar. Now there's a market for it. Contact creates demand. You cannot want something you've never seen. And once a whole class of people would develop a taste for something, that isn't produced at home, somebody has to go and get it. That's trade. So now let's look at how Europe society was organized. There is a formal hierarchy, king, barons or nobles, knights, and peasants, with each layer having its own right and duties. So it's a leader, and each run owes something to the run above and provides something to the run below. Land goes down, service and loyalty come up. Now here's the sentence on the slides that I really want you to sit with because this is economic of the whole system. Here, political elites restrict entry area of the economy in order to generate monopoly rents. These rents are distributed to those with enough coercive power to disrupt the existing power structure. Let me say this in plain English because this is dense. First, rent. In everyday speech, rent is what you pay your landlord. In economic, it means something a little bit different. Economic rent is extra income you earn because of special position, not because you produced anything. If I'm the only person allowed to mill grain in this valley, I can charge more than it costs me. That's actual is rent. Second, restrict entry. The elite makes rules so that not just anyone can do a certain business. Only guild members can waive. Only the lowest mill can grant grain. Blocking competition is what creates the rent in the first place. Third, and this is the clever part, who gets rent? The slide said people with enough coercive power to disrupt the existing power structure. In other words, people who could cause you serious trouble if they wouldn't pay off. Barons with soldiers, kings, knights. So look at what the system really is. It's a deal. The king says, I will let you collect income you didn't earn, and in return, you don't overthrow me, and you fight for me when I ask. That's a way of buying political stability, and it works. But notice the cost. People getting paid are getting paid for not making trouble, not for producing anything. That's a drug on the economy. And it's a theme that runs through the whole course. In England, around 1200, the king's authority came from two sources. He was the largest landowner. Royal money came from land, and he sat at the top of the feudal system. The first point matters more than it looks. The king's income comes from land, not from taxing trade. So a king in 1200 has fairly small and fixed income. If he wants more, he mostly has to ask. And asking is how payments start. Hold that thought for a later unit. The manor is the English word for land owner owned by the feudal lord. He would farm part of it himself, and the rest could be farmed by peasants. Serfs were not technically slaves, but their status was weak. As well as the labor service, they owned their landlord rent, a death duty, a payment on marriage, and a poll tax. Read that, listen again. Rent. A payment when something dies, a payment when you get married, head tax, you are paying to live, paying to die, and paying to marry, not slaves. A serf cannot simply be bought and sold as a person, and he has some customary right, but he cannot live. He's tied to the land, and that's the key economic problem. Labor cannot move. Why does that matter? Because if workers cannot move, they cannot go where they'd be most useful. Land might be better somewhere else. A town might need workers. Doesn't matter. You are you are stuck. An economic where labor cannot move is an economic that wastes a lot of its people. Now, the base of everything. Before you can have trade, towns, and banks, you need farms that produce more food than the farmers ate. The iron plow became widely used in Europe by around 1000, making it possible to farm the heavier clay soils in the north. We covered this at the end of the last unit, but so just a reminder. Southern soil is thin and dry, and light plow scratches is fine. North, northern soil is heavy and rich and much richer. You need a heavy iron plow to tend it. Once you have one, Northern Europe becomes some of the best farmland in the world. Now the new thing, the three crop rotation system, which is an improvement on the two crop system used by the Greeks and Romans. Here's the problem it solves. If you grow the same crop in the same field every year, the soil runs out. So you have to rest the land. The old Roman way was two fields. Grow on one, rest the other. So at any time, half of your land is doing nothing. The new way uses three fields. One third is planted with cereal, wheat, barley in autumn. Another third is planted in spring with oats, barley, and such as peas, beans, and the last third is left fallow, meaning it rests. Count what changes. Under the old system, half of the land rests. On the new one, only a third does. So you are farming two-thirds of your land instead of half. The result was a 33% increase in agriculture production. And there's a second benefit that slides does not spell out, so I will. Look at what's in the spring field. Peas, beans, and those are legumes. And legumes put nutrient into the soil. So the spring crop isn't just actual food, it's also feed the ground. And it's feed the people better too because beans are protein. There's a third benefit. Two planting seasons instead of one spreads out of the work over the year. So labor and your animals are not all needed in one short window. And if one crop fails, you still have the other. So one change in farming routine gives you a third more output, better soil, better diets, smoother work and less risk. So new machine required, just a better system. And this is what makes the rest of today possible. More food per farmer means some people can stop farming and go live in a town. ，Let's look at ordinary life for a moment. The diet would have lots of bread, butter, and cheese. Vegetables like peas, beans, cabbage, fruit when available, fish from the river, and some meat, particularly mutton. They would keep most of food they grow, but some would be sold in exchange for goods they did not make themselves, such as tools. Notice that last part. Most of what you grow, you eat, and some get sold. That's the beginning of a market economy. Not much of one, but it's there and it grows. Villages would have their own artisans, such as carpenters and blacksmiths. Household would earn actual income by spinning or brewing or working as servant in the lord's house. So even in a village, there's some specialization. Not everyone farms all day and households has side income. That's real economic activity and it usually doesn't show up in any record. Now, this next one deserves a pause. Women bore a heavy burden, fetching the water and the wood, looking after the poultry, spinning and textile and the mending clothes, picking wild fruit and nuts, keeping the garden, making butter, cheese, and beer, as well as all the cooking and cleaning. Read that list as an economist. Almost every item is production. Making clothes is manufacturing. Making butter, cheese, and beer is food processing. Keeping poetry and a garden is farming. This is not housework as we use the word today. This is a large share of the village's total output, and almost none of it was counted then or now. When historians estimate mid-annual income, this work is mostly invisible because it never gets sold and never gets written down. So keep in mind that our numbers underestimate what was actually produced, and they understate women's share of it badly. Most people spend their life just getting by. At the start of this period, medieval Europe was still poor relative to Asia. That's the baseline. Everything we talk about for the rest of the hour start from here. So next part, we are going to talk about the trade and the commercial revolution. Between 1000 and 1300, Europe experienced a period of sustained economic growth. The word to underline is sustained. Lots of places grow for 20 or 30 years, a good run of weather, a strong king, then it stops. What's different here is that it keeps going for 3 centuries. The population grew, income per person increased, cities grew dramatically, and the volume of trade expanded many times over. I want you to notice how unusual that combination is. Normally, in an old economy, when the population grows, income per person falls. More mouths, same amount of land, so everyone gets a smaller slice. That's the standard pattern before modern times. Here, both go up together. Population and income per person, that means output is growing faster than the population is. Something real is improving. The rotation system, trade, better organization. For some economic historians, its growth set the stage for what was to come. 2 quarters on the slide. 1070. He says that kind of self-generating expansion economics now look for so anxiously in poor country arrived in Western Europe in the late 11th century. I want to unpack self-generating. He means Growth that feeds itself. Better farming supports towns. Towns create market. Markets encourage specialization. Specialization raises output. Higher output supports bigger towns. Round and round. Once the loop starts turning, it doesn't need a push from outside anywhere. Sipala here he called the rise of Europe cities in the 900s through 1100s a turning point in the history of the West, and he says of the whole world. That's a strong claim, and you should treat it as a claim, not a fact. Other historians would say the real break comes much later, but it's a serious argument, and the rest of today gives you the evidence to judge it. Now let's follow the money. Venice benefited from being able to trade with both the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic. Look at the Venice seats. It's at the top of the Adriatic. Facing east, it is not really a farming town. It's built on a lagoon, so Venice has to trade. It has no other position, and it sits exactly between rich Europe facing the market and much richer Eastern Mediterranean. The city So you can look at this sentence. This is a deal worth studying. Venice sells military help and get paid not in cash, but in trading right. No tools means your goods cost less than your competitors' goods. Forever, that's better than money. That's a permanent cost advantage. This is a pattern you will see again and again in this course. Merchants buying legal privileges from the rulers. Governments has something to sell, the right to do business on good terms, and merchants will pay for it. And also, let's explain the second sentence. I'll flag what that was. The fourth crusade was supposed to go fight in Egypt. It ended up attacking and looting Constantinople, and a Christian city, largely because of the Crusaders on Venice money for their ships. It's one of the ugliest episodes in the medieval history, and it's permanently weakened Byzantium. Okay, so the next part is okay. Now let's the last point on this slide, which is my favorite. In Venice, ownership of ships and cargoes were divided into shares called loca. A wide range of citizens could invest. An individual could hold more 24ths of a locum, and the ownership could be pledged as security for a loan. Stop and think about what that is. You're taking one ship, split into 24 pieces, and sell the pieces. Why does that matter? Two reasons. First, risk. If you own one whole ship and it sinks, you are ruined. And if you own 1/24 of 24 different ships and one sinks, you will lose about 4%. Same money invested, far less chance of disaster. That's diversification. Do not put everything in one place, and Venice figured it out in the 1200s. Second, who can invest? A whole ship is expensive. Almost nobody can afford one. 24th of the ship is affordable for an ordinary merchant. a craftsman, a widow. So a pool of money available to fund voyeurs gets much larger. More money chasing voyeurs means more voyeurs. And the last line, you could use your share as security for a loan. So the share isn't just an investment, it's an asset you can borrow against. That's another way of saying it's close to a financial security in the modern sense. Ships broken into tradable shares, owned by many people, used as collateral. That's not far from a stock market. Now we get to analytical core of this course, and it starts with a very simple example. Support an English merchant buys wool in England for £5. In Flanders, that same wool is worth £8. Flanders is roughly more than Belgium, and it was the great clothes-making region of medieval Europe. They want English wool. If the English merchant takes the wool to the Flanders, he can find a Flemish merchant willing to buy it for somewhere between £5 and £8. Both sides gain. The Englishman paid 5 and he sells for more than 5. The Fleming pays less than 8 for something worth 8 to him. Here's £3 of value created, and they split it into somehow depending on the whole bargain better. This is called a spot exchange. Always see it happens in the spot market. The key thing about spot exchange is that everything happens at once. I had you I hand you the wool, you hand me the money, we both walk away. Nobody has to trust anybody. Then the side asks the question the next four slides answer. What happens if there's some delay between the goods and the payment arriving? And in the real long distance trade, there's always a delay. The wool sells for weeks. The buyer wants to inspect before paying, or he wants to sell the clothes before he can pay you, or you shipped on credit. The moment there's a gap in time, someone has to go first, and the person who goes first is exposed. So the question for the next section is, how do you make trade happen when one side has to go first and there's no reliable course to proc them? So this is the game tree. Now let's put it into the simple model, and this is called the game tree, and it's just show who decide what in order. There are two players, a wool manufacturer who has the goods, and a merchant who will carry them and sell them. The manufacturer moves first. He has two choices. Give the wool to merchant or don't. If he doesn't give it, nothing happens. Nobody trade, both get 0, so the trade that's 0, 0. If he does give it, now it's the merchant's turn. The merchant has the wool, he has two choices, pay or don't pay. If he pays, they split the gains, 5, 5, 5 each. If he doesn't pay, he keeps everything, 0, 10. The manufacturer gets nothing, the merchant gets 10. Please note that the first number represents the payoff of the manufacturer and the second is the payoff of the merchant. So now let's solve it. And the way you solve a game like this to start at the end and work backwards. This is a backward induction. And it's just mean figure out what the last player will do, then Work out what the first player should do, knowing that. So start with a merchant. At the end, he has the wall in his hand. He compares 5 if he pays with 10 if he doesn't. 10 is bigger than 5. He doesn't pay. He's not a villain. He's just doing the arithmetic in front of him. Now go back to the manufacturer at the start. He's not stupid. He can do the same the merchant did. So he knows that if he hands over the wall, he'll get nothing. So what does he do? He compares handing it over, which gets him 0, without handing it over, which also gets him 0. There's a reason to take the risk. He doesn't give the wall. We end at 0, 0. So now, look at what just happened. There were 10 pounds of value sitting on the table. Both players could have had 5. Instead, they both get nothing. Nobody was irrational. Nobody made a mistake. Both did exactly what was best for them at every step, and the outcome is worst on one available. This is the central problem for pre-modern trade, and I want you to be able to state it in one sentence. When one side has to go first and the other side has no reason to keep their word, the trade does not happen at all. Notice what is not the problem here. It's not that people were greedy or dishonest. You'd get the same result with perfectly nice people as long as they follow its own interest. And it's not lack of profit. There's plenty of profit sitting there. The problem is that the merchant cannot credibly promise to pay. He'd like to promise, the manufacturer would like to believe him, but everyone can see the arithmetic. That's why economists get excited about the medieval institutions. Every institution we are about to look at is an attempt to fix this one game. Okay, so let's look at the question. How do you fix it? The answer is change the payoff. Make cheating cost something. So the simple way to play the game more than once, notice title of the slide, repeated game. Okay. Suppose this is not one-time deal. Suppose the manufacturer and the merchant is expected to trade every year for the next 20 years. Now the merchant choices change completely. If he cheats, he gets 10 this year and nothing after that, because the manufacturer will never deal with him again. If he pays, he gets 5 a year every year. 5 times 20 is 100. That beats 10 easily. So repetition solves this. The threat of losing all future business is the punishment. And the punishment is bigger than the price for cheating. And this is the catch. Repetition only works if two things are true. The relationship has to keep going and each side has to believe it will keep going. And in long distance trade, this is exactly what's missing. You sell to a foreign port, you meet a merchant you will never meet, you will probably never see him again, you might not even be alive next year. The game really is one shot. So repetition is between two individuals isn't enough. You need something bigger. Here's the key idea. What if cheating one person means being punished by everyone? Then even one-time deal with stranger becomes part of long game because the stranger isn't really acting alone. He's acting inside the group that will find out what he did. That's the idea. Let's look at two real historical examples of it. The long distance trade. Jewish trades in Muslim North Africa were premented in the 10th and 11th centuries. We know a remarkable amount of them because thousands of their letters survived in a storeroom, so we can actually read their business correspondence. Here's their problem. A Harabi merchant wants to sell goods in Sicily or Egypt. He cannot go himself. The trip takes months. So he used an agent overseas, and that's our game began. The agent has goods, the merchant far away, and the agent could just give the money. The key to the trader's success was their ability to use multilateral punishment strategy. Multi parties agree to punish anyone who cheats any individual in the group. That's the sentence to remember. Let's precise about what multilateral is. Under the simple version, if you cheat me, I'll stop dealing with you. That hurts, but maybe not enough. There are lots of other merchants out there. On the multilateral punishment, if you cheat me, I tell everyone, and everyone stops dealing with you, not just me. You are not out one customer, you are out of the business. So now redo the merchant's logic. Cheat once, gain 10, and lost every future deal with every member of the group. Nobody cheats. The effectiveness of this strategy hinged on there being a close-knit community of traders. That's the condition, and it's also the limitation. This only works if new travels. If everyone knows everyone, writes to each other, and can identify who's in the group, which is why this network run a shared religion, family ties, and a common language. And there's a weakness. It doesn't scale. The group has to stay small enough for reputation to circulate. You cannot treat with outsiders because outsiders are not in the punishment system. So net worth is safe, but is capped. In the 11th and 12th century, the Macrobi trader was displaced by Italian merchant, and the Italians used different system. Community responsibility enable these merchants to overcome the problem of exchange. Community responsibility meant that individual merchant was made responsible for the behavior of their peers. This one takes a second to get your hands around, so let me spell it out. See, a merchant from Flanders owes money to a merchant from England, and he doesn't pay. Under community responsibility, the English merchant goes to its own city court. The court then goes after any Flemish merchant it can find and seize its goods. That sounds unfair, and that is to that individual, and look at the incentives it creates. Now, every Flemish merchant has a strong reason to make sure other Flemish merchants to pay their debts, because if one of them cheats, they all pay for it. So the whole community starts policing itself, and crucially, the community can do that far more than cheaply than a foreign court could, because they're right there. They know each other, and they have local ways to apply pressure. The court of the Flemish merchant has had an incentive to uphold complaints from the court of English merchant, which in turn only championed genuine complaints. Both halves matter. The Flemish court settles real claims because if it doesn't, its own merchant gets seized aboard. And the English court doesn't send big claims because if it does, its reputation dies and the owner merchant gets treated the same way. So each city has the reason to be honest with the other city. It's cities enforcing on each other instead of individuals enforcing on individuals. This allows borrowers to credibly commit to repaying lenders, even though they might never trade again in future. That's the payoff line, and it's the answer of our game. Remember, the problem was that the merchant couldn't make believable promise. Now he can. Not because he's a nicer person, but because his whole city is standing behind him. And notice why this system beat McRae one. You don't have to be personally known, you just have to be from somewhere so you can trade with strangers and the network can get much, much bigger. That's the real story of the commercial revolution. Not better ships or better rules, a better way of making promises believable. Now, money. See, a merchant in Florence want to buy goods from another in Constantinople. Sending a gold or silver coins by boat was risky, and even if the money got there, the Florentine might not be confident the goods could come back. Same problem as before, plus a shipping problem. So he gives an international merchant a promissory note, a bill of exchange, which is better, which is uh which is sent to seller. The seller hands over the good and get paid by the agent of the international merchant. The buyer pays in Florence and the international merchant takes a healthy cut for being the middleman. Let's follow that carefully because it's clever. The gold never crosses sea. Nobody ships coins. The big international merchant has money in both cities, so he pays out in Constantinople and collects in Florence. From his point of view, money moved from one pocket to another. From the trader's point of view, a payment crosses 1,000 miles safely. And that middleman caught his payment for two things, taking the risk and holding money in two places at once. That's what a bank does. You should also recognize this from last unit. This is essentially the same instrument the Islamic word I was using, the hawala, the bill of exchange. Europe is adopting a tool that already existed to the east through those Italian ports we just talked about. The greater availability of credit meant interest rate fall from the high rate typically in ancient times. In the early 1300s, annual rate in Italian was around 8 to 12%. Now, 8 to 12% sounds high to us, but compared to the ancient world, where 20, 30, even 50% was normal. Why does a falling interest rate matter so much? Because the interest rate is the price of using money over time. If money costs 40% a year, only widely profitable projects are worth doing. At 10%, a much wider range of projects makes sense. So a falling interest rate means more works, more workshops, more buildings. And why did it fall? Partly more saving looking for a home, but mostly because lending got safer. Thanks to exactly the institution we just described, lower risk means lower price. Each trader could have arrived at a fair with bags of gold and silver from his hometown, But it was a risky strategy in the 12th and 13th century Europe, and many traders would be both buying and selling, so they'd probably had to haul their coins home again. Picture the great fairs. The biggest were in Champagne, in North France. Merchants come from all over Europe several times a year. Hundreds of deals get made. If everyone brings coins, you have cars of silver moving across the battered country twice for no reason, because most of it just got back home again. So bankers operated at the fairs, acting as clearing houses for all trades. A merchant could end up with a credit or a debt that could be settled later or simply rolled over to the next fair. Clearinghouse is worth defining. It just means someone keeps score. You own him, he own her, she own you. Instead of every pair of paying each other, the banker cancels everything out and only leftover difference actually gets paid. And often that leftover doesn't get paid either. It just carries over to the next fair, which means the payment never happens at all. It just sits on the books. Financial innovation thus lowers the transaction cost, allow cash and would other words be hard to be put to work, and allow merchants to take more risk. Three benefits in one sentence. Lower costs because you are not shipping a metal, you are shipping metal. You are not shipping metal. Money doing something instead of sitting in a chest. And merchant willing to take bigger risk because the system is safer. Now, public debts. This is where it gets really modern. Venice set up a loan office called the Motor Vessel in the 13th century. Rich citizens were compelled to make loans to the city, and they received 5% annual interest in return. Now the word compelled, it a forced loan. You didn't volunteer. In effect, it's a tax, but a tax you get paid back. The debt was treatable. And citizens brought the loans as a home for their savings. A 5% yield at time of zero long-term inflation was pretty good deal, and the bonds were traded along with the commodities at an exchange in the century area called Realto. The word tradable is important one. It means if you need your money back, you don't wait for the government to repay you. You sell your bond to someone else. And that changed the nature of the thing. A forced loan you cannot escape is a burden. A bond you can sell whenever you like is an asset. People started buying them on purpose. Note also zero long-term inflation. In a silver currency, prices don't draft up year after year the way do today. So 5% is real 5%. Today, 5% with 3 inflation is really 2%. And then the ending. In a telling sign of Valentine decline, interest payment was suspended for the first time in 1379. The yield was cut to 4% in 1383. The state never caught up, and by the late 1470s was 3 years behind schedule. 20 years behind your interest payment, that's a default in everything but name. And I also want you to notice why this is in the lecture. Government borrowing is a test. A state can borrow cheaply is a state people trust. When Venice stops paying, that trust is gone and it never fully come back. Venice financial decline shows up in the bond market before it shows up anywhere else. That link between a government's honest about its debt and its long-run power comes back in a big way when we get to England and New Zealand. Cities do not produce all their own food. They need to earn enough income to buy food from elsewhere, and that in turn encourages the development of new trade and industries. That's a nice bit of logic. So let's trace it. A city cannot feed itself, so a city must sell something to the countryside to pay for food, so a city must make things. Clothes, metalwork, tools, or provide services like trade and banking. In other words, the need to buy food is what forces cities to specialize. Cities are not just where the industry happens to be. The pressure to eat is what creates the industry. Markets can be held in towns, where large numbers of consumers and merchants can gather together. More people in one place means more buyers and sellers, which means better prices, more choice, and easier trade. Density itself is valuable, and cities were places where people could escape from their fixed rule under the feudal system. This is the most important line on the slide. Remember, the self tied to the land on payment to marry and to die. Well, if he can get to a town and stay there in many places for a year and a day, he becomes free. There was a German saying, town air makes you free. Think about what that does to the whole system. Suddenly, laws are in competition with towns for labor. If you treat your peasants too badly, they leave. So the existence of towns improves conditions even for people who stay in the countryside. That's the mechanism I flagged at the very start of the Spanish settles. The ability to exist to give you power even if you never use it. Last topic, and it's one where economists generally disagree. During the commercial revolution, guilds, craft and merchant organizations regulated large parts of the Europe economy from the late Middle Age to the Industrial Revolution. That's a long run. Guys are not small detail. They are how much of the European economy was organized for 500 years. To work in a trade, you generally has to be a member of guild. Membership was restricted, and you have to serve a long apprenticeship before becoming a master. Craft guilds regulate goods and labor markets. They also helped local authorizing collect taxes. They keep their privilege by allying with local political authorities. Here's the deal. There's a deal. And it should sound familiar from the video slide. The guide helped the city government collecting tax, keeping orders trade. In turn, the government gives the guild a monopoly. Both sides went outside loose. One purpose of the merchant guide was to serve as a collective voice against the rulers who wished to transgress upon their right. That's the other side. A single merchant can robbed by ruler and can do nothing. A guild of merchants can threaten to leave or to stop trading in that city entirely. That's real bargaining power, and protects property. It's one of the way Europe rulers came to be constrained. Historians are divided about whether guild helped or hindered economic development. Let's do both sides. For the defense, Epstein argued that the craft guilds and the apprentice system played a critical role in encouraging investment in industrial specific human capital. Here's a problem he's pointing at. Training a young worker is expensive. Why would a master do it when the trainer can walk away the moment he's skilled and compete against with you? And why would the trainer work for low payment for 7 years when the master could just throw him out at year six? Neither side can trust the other. So without something to hold the deal together, nobody trains anybody. It's our game again, in different costume. The guild solves it by enforcing the contract on both sides. The apprentice cannot leave early. The master cannot cheat him, and the guild certifies the qualification at the end, so the training is worth something. Craft guilds also helped resolve problems of asymmetric information, such as verifying product quality. Same argument were made about Indian last week. The guild is a shared brand name. If the guild enforces standard, a buyer far away can trust the good without inspecting them. So let me put it together. We started with a poor, fragmented Europe. We finished with an economy that grew for 300 years straight. What changed? Farming came first. The heavy plow and the three-field rotation gave Europe a third more food. That's what let people leave the fields. But the more interesting part is the trust problem. We drew a very simple game and got a very depressing result when one side has to go first, and there's no way to force the other to keep their word. The trade does not happen, even though both sides would gain. And then we watched people solve it. The Maghrebi traders solved it with a tight community and punished cheats collectively. The Indians solved it with community responsibility, where your whole city stood behind your promise, and that version worked with strangers, so it scales. Bills of exchange moved money without moving metal. Fears cleared debts without moving coin. Venice sold shares in ships so risk could be spread, and sold bonds so citizens can lend to the state. None of that is technology in usual sense. Nobody invented a machine. What they invented was ways of making promises believable. And once promises were believable, strangers can trade. Once strangers can trade, the market gets bigger. And a bigger market means more specialization. More specialization means more output. There's commercial revolution. For next time, review the economic rent, the game tree, and the backward induction, community responsibility, the bill of exchange, and two arguments about guilds. Okay, see you next lecture.